Alright, good afternoon, Algebra 1. Today what we are talking about is factoring if our a is greater than 1. So really what that means is that this number right here, this a, this guy, he's bigger than 1. So if we have a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc., etc., how do I do it? So there's this method. It's called FOSI. And this is the method that we're going to use in order to figure it out. So here's an example of something that has a coefficient a, or a leading coefficient, is greater than 1. So, now some people who did well with guess and check, this is certainly something that you can do guess and check with as well if your number sense is strong. Of course, if you'd like to, you can still follow FOSI, but my advice is that you start with FOSI, and as you start to build upon that and understand maybe certain patterns that work for you or can recognize those things, branch off and find what method works for you, but I'm going to recommend that we all start with FOSI. So, what FOSI stands for is we are looking for the factors of whose sum is. So there's a little invisible whose sum is. Just write all the letters here so you can see them. And so what we're really looking for is, in order to do this, I have to determine, well, what factors of am I looking for? So it's the same thing as what numbers multiply to blank that add to blank. So what I'm going to do for the factors of is I'm going to take this 2, I'm going to multiply it by the 3. So the factors of 2 times 3, which is 6, or numbers that multiply to 6, whose sum is, and it's still going to be that second number, it's still going to be my b value. So I'm going to look for numbers who multiply to 6 and add to a -7. Alright, and so once I run through this might be throwing a lot at you all at once, but we've actually been using FOSI without us realizing it. So, I'll explain that part after I run through this problem. But, what I'm going to look for is I'm going to write down all the factors of 6. All the numbers that multiply to 6. So I have 6 and 1, I have 2, and I have 3. I also have my negatives, -6 and -1, and then -2 and -3. So now I'm going to look for which of these, if I add them together, is going to get me -7. And it's going to be -6 and -1. So now, most of us are inclined to go and write out the answer from here, x minus 6 and x minus 1. Now the problem here is we actually took our number 2 and we multiplied it by the 3. So what I have to do is I have to do the following. I have to go and I have to divide out that 2. So what it's going to look like is I'm going to write this as a t-chart. On top of my t-chart is 2x and 2x. Now I got these 2x's from that beginning term. Okay, because I ended up dividing that away. This is going to show you, this is really saying here's what my x coefficient is going to be. What's on bottom is what the other number is going to be, what my other term is going to be. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the factors that I got. I received a -6 and a -1. Make sure you're always keeping the signs attached wherever you go. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look through each of these and say, can I simplify any of this? So can I simplify 2 and 6 if they were in a fraction form? And the answer is yes, you can. Both of them are divisible by 2. So if I divided both by 2, the top would become a 1 and the bottom would become a -3. Make sure that negative sign stays attached. So once I've looked, and my right hand side, I can't simplify those any further. They're just going to remain as they are. And so my final step of what I'm going to do is I'm going to piece everything together, kind of like my instinct was to do in the beginning, but I'm going to do it here at the end. So my final answer is going to be x minus 3, 1x minus 3, times 2x minus 1. Combining each of what's on top with what's on bottom. Okay? And again, you can always verify, you can always check and double distribute to make sure that this answer is correct. But this method of FOSI is a very strong method in helping you find factors of something that has 2 in front of your x squared instead of just having the normal x squareds that we thought about before. Okay? So, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to really quick show you that we've already used this before. Alright, so here is what it looks like. Let's do that exact same method with something we've already done. So with FOSI, I was looking for the factors of, and we said we multiplied the number that's in front of my x value with the last number. So if I multiplied 1 by 6, I'd be left with 6. So factors of 6 whose sum is 5, that middle term, right? Numbers that multiply to 6 and add to 5. So now if I were to go and figure out what that is, I can write my list down. I have 6, I have 1, I have 3, I have 2, I have negative 6, negative 1, negative 3, negative 2. Now the one that works here is 3 and 2, right? And so now our next step was we said, okay, let's just go ahead and write out what the factors are. But really what we were doing, without us realizing, we could still follow this FOSI method, which we were doing by making this little t-chart. And on top I'd write 1x and 1x, or just to know that that's where my coefficient is. And then beneath it I wrote a 3 and I wrote a 2. And now I can't really simplify the 1 and the 3 on the left hand side or the 1 and the 2 on the right hand side. So we just went ahead and said, oh, these are my factors, x plus 3 and x plus 2. So we've been using the FOSI method, we just didn't have to simplify if we didn't have a number in front of my x squared. Okay, so we've actually done this stuff before, and so what we're going to continue doing is we're just going to continue practicing with some of that. So I'll explain this again for number 2, number 3, and number 4 as well. So for number 2, I'm looking for factors of, I'm going to multiply the 3 by the negative 5. So 3 times negative 5 is going to get me a negative 15. So factors of negative 15 whose sum is 14. So let's list out all my factors of negative 15. I could have a negative 15 and a 1. I could have a negative 5 and a 3. I could have a 15 and a negative 1. Remember, those are going to be the same as well. And then I have a 5 and a negative 3. So I could look through and figure out which ones are going to work, which ones are going to work, which ones are going to work. And I have 15 and negative 1 are going to work. Okay, so my next step is now I have to rewrite all of this. So I'm going to write my little t-chart. I'm going to put a 3n, 3n. Again, the n is just saying here's where your coefficient is, and it also helps us remember when we go to write the factors, so that way we don't just have a bunch of numbers over here, and it makes it a lot easier. And so underneath I'm going to put my factors that I got. I got a 15 and I have a negative 1. So I'm going to say, can these simplify? So can they? 15 and 3 can, right? 3 goes into 15. How many times? It goes in 5 times. And then on my left-hand side, 3 and negative 1 don't simplify. So when I go to rewrite this, I'm going to have a 1n, or just n, plus 5 times 3n minus 1. Alright, so some of us who may not, or who may have preferred guess and check method, so you could potentially come up with this stuff on your own. It is going to be a little bit harder. You just have to take into account the fact that you're breaking down that first term as well. It's got to be a 3 and a 1. That's going to break down the 3 up in front. And just think about what other numbers might work. Again, you are more than welcome to do that. But FOSI is probably going to help you at least get started with it. Alright, so for the next example, I'm going to take the factors of negative 4 times 7 which is negative 28. Yes, you do have to keep that negative attached with it. So the factors of negative 28 whose sum is 12. So I'm going to go and list out all my factors of negative 28. So I have negative 28 and 1. I have negative 14 and 2. I have negative 7 and 4. I have 28 and negative 1. I have 14 and negative 2. I have 7 and negative 4. So now I'm going to look and say, alright, well, when I take the sum of these, who gets me a positive 12? It is 14 and negative 2. So my next step, draw my little t-chart, and I'm going to write a negative 4x. You do have to carry that negative along with it. And I'm going to write my other factors underneath, 14 and a negative 2. So now I'm going to look and say, do these simplify? Can I simplify negative 4 and 14? Yes, I can simplify them. I can simplify, the top would become a negative 2, that negative is still going to stay attached to it, and the bottom is going to be a 7. And now on my right hand side, can negative 4 and negative 2 cancel? Yes. When I divide two negatives, I'm going to be left with a positive. So I'm going to have just a positive 2 on top and a 1 below. It does not become 0. Very important thing to note. It becomes 1. So when I go to write these, I'm going to have negative 2x plus 7 times 2x plus 1. Now, for these ones, it is very important that you make sure, A, you're dividing by, when you're dividing by that 2, you end up with a 1 left over, and you don't turn it into a 0. And B, that when you're doing this, you carry down your negatives. You cannot forget that I'm going to have a negative 2 up here, so the negative 2 is going to follow. Alright, so for number 4, I'm going to, again, follow the same pattern. Factors of 3 times 7, which is 21, whose sum is 22. So my factors, I have 21 and 1, I have 7 and 3, I have negative 21 and negative 1, and negative 7 and negative 3. So my final, or sorry, not my final, the ones that sum to 22 is going to be the first one, and I'm going to draw my t-chart and move forward. So I'm going to write a 3w, and I have 21 and 1. So when I go to divide, I'm going to have a 1w on top, and I'm going to have 7 down below, giving me my final answer of w plus 7, or 1w plus 7, times 3w plus 1. Alright, so that is FOSI. Again, we have done stuff with FOSI without us really realizing it, but here's kind of adding it all together and showing you how to find factors of polynomials whose a term, whose leading coefficient is greater than 1. So of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to come in and ask me about them, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.